Graham Foster had exactly $3 in his wallet, a half-eaten granola bar in his coat pocket, and a 5-year-old daughter who thought he could fix anything with duct tape and a hug. He couldn't fix this. Rain poured down on the cracked sidewalk outside the Midtown Job Center, where the line for walk-in interviews had wrapped around the block since sunrise. Graham's dark gray hoodie clung to him, soaked through, and his jeans were stiff from drying on the radiator last night. He held a plastic bag with a pair of extra socks, a folded resume creased and damp, and a toy giraffe for his daughter, Leela, who was back at his neighbor's apartment 2 floors down from his own. He was just about to turn the corner when he noticed a woman sitting on a bench beneath the awning of the bus stop. Her head was down, blonde hair hanging wet over her shoulders, and she was crying, shoulders shaking, silent tears cutting down her cheeks. She wore a sleek black coat, the kind that probably cost more than his entire rent, and heels that didn't belong on this street. Graham hesitated, then pulled out the napkin he'd stuffed in his pocket from the coffee shop he couldn't afford to buy anything from. "Hey," he said gently, holding it out. "It's not much, but it's dry." The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were red, mascara smudged. She blinked at the napkin, then at him, then back to the napkin. After a long second, she let out a breathy laugh and took it. "Thanks," she said quietly. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's done for me this week." He shrugged, trying to ignore how beautiful she was, even crying. "Tough week," she let out a humorless laugh. "You could say that." He didn't ask more. He just sat beside her, letting the rain slap the sidewalk in front of them. She dabbed at her eyes, then glanced sideways at him. "You don't look like you're having the best day either." Graham smiled faintly. "I've had worse." They sat in silence for a few seconds. Then she asked, "What's your name?" Graham Foster," she nodded. "I'm Harper." Harper Nolan. He didn't recognize the name. She looked like someone important, someone who didn't usually end up crying at bus stops in the rain. "You waiting for a bus?" he asked. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I just needed a minute away from everything." "Yeah," he said. "I get that." The silence felt comfortable now. Then Harper's eyes drifted down to the plastic bag by his feet. "You going to a job interview?" Graham hesitated. "Trying to. I've been out of work for a while. My little girl starts kindergarten next year, and I'm just trying to keep things together until then." Harper stared at him for a beat too long, then looked down quickly. "I'm sorry," she said. "That must be hard." "It's life," he said simply. She nodded slowly, like she was weighing something in her head. Then the sound of a car horn broke the quiet. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. Harper stood, smoothing her coat. "That's me." Graham stood too. "Hey, I hope your week gets better." She gave him a look, soft, curious. "Thanks for the tissue, Graham." And then she slipped into the car and disappeared down the street. The last person Graham expected to see walk into the small auto shop 2 days later was the woman from the bus stop. He was on his back under a sputtering Honda, trying to keep grease from dripping into his eyes when a pair of black heels stopped at the edge of the bay. "Graham," he slid out and blinked up at her. "Harper." She looked different today, put together, calm, confident, and she wasn't crying. "I was hoping I'd find you," she said. He sat up slowly. "How'd you know I'd be here?" "I asked around," she said. "I remembered your name. I looked you up." He wiped his hands on a rag. Okay, why?" She stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "Because you were kind to me when you didn't have to be, and because I want to offer you a job." Graham stared at her. "What?" "I own a company, Nolan Tech. Ever heard of it?" His eyebrows shot up. You're Harper Nolan." Her lips twitched. "Yeah, that's me," he laughed, stunned. "You're serious?" "I am. You said you can fix anything with your hands, right?" "Yeah, but I need someone to manage the maintenance fleet at our downtown facility. It's a real job, good salary, benefits, and daycare on site." He blinked at her, speechless. "You don't have to say yes now," she said. "But I meant what I said. You helped me when I felt like the world was caving in. Let me return the favor." Graham took the job. He didn't want to at first, didn't want to feel like a charity case, but Harper made it clear this was business. She respected his work, saw potential in him. And when he brought Leela to the company daycare, and she came out beaming with finger paint on her cheeks, and a new best friend named Emma, Graham realized maybe this wasn't just a lifeline, it was a second chance. Over the next 2 months, he saw Harper more than he expected. She checked in often at first about logistics, scheduling, invoices. But then there were other things: a coffee dropped off at his desk, a quick lunch in the break room, a laugh shared over a ridiculous maintenance request. And sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, she looked at him with something soft and unspoken in her eyes. What he didn't know was that Harper hadn't stopped thinking about him since that rainy afternoon. That something about the way he handed her that napkin had cracked something wide open in her chest. That despite the 1,000 reasons she shouldn't fall for him, she already had. "Your daughter loves puzzles," Harper said, lightly tapping her fingers against the edge of the glass table in the executive lounge. She finished the one in the daycare lobby in under 10 minutes. Graham looked up from the folder in his hands. "She's got a mind for patterns." "Always has." They were alone in the spacious corner room, the skyline glittering behind Harper's head like a crown. The room was meant for high-level meetings, with sleek leather chairs and an espresso machine that probably cost more than his car. Graham still wasn't sure how he'd ended up there. He'd only come up to drop off a finalized fleet maintenance report. But Harper had asked him to stay, said she wanted his opinion on something. That had been 25 minutes ago. She leaned back in her chair, her posture as precise as ever. "I don't think I've ever met a kid so observant." She asked if my shoes were uncomfortable. He laughed. "She's 5. She asks questions like she runs a courtroom." "She's terrifying," Harper said with a small smile, then added, "in the best way." He watched her for a moment. "You don't talk about your own family much." She didn't flinch, but there was something in the way her fingers stilled. "There's not much to say." "I find that hard to believe." She glanced down at her hands, then back up. "My parents died when I was in college. Car accident. It was sudden." "No siblings, no extended family." Graham nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." "Thanks." Her voice was calm. "I threw myself into work after that. Started my first company before I turned 26. Most people thought I was too young. Too inexperienced. They were wrong. They were loud about it." She stood and walked to the window, her reflection barely visible in the glass. "I worked hard enough that I didn't have to hear them anymore." Graham stayed quiet, watching the way her shoulders shifted as she folded her arms. "I never thought about having kids," she said after a pause. "Never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd care about finger paint and snack schedules, but seeing Leela, she makes it look like everything matters. She'd follow you around like a puppy if you let her." Harper turned around. "She already does." The silence that stretched between them this time felt different, weighted, not awkward but charged. Like something unsaid was hovering just beyond the edge of their words. Graham cleared his throat and looked down at the folder again. "The new hybrid vans should cut fuel costs by nearly 30%. I've got the specs if you want them." "I don't care about the specs, Graham." He looked up. "I trust your judgment. I asked you up here because I wanted to talk, not about vans." His pulse kicked up. "About what?" She walked back to her chair but didn't sit. "About you, about us." He stood too slowly. "There is no us." Harper gave him a look that didn't waver. "You don't believe that." "I don't mix personal with professional, neither do I, until now." He stepped back, palms open. "Harper, you're my boss. You were a stranger with a kind heart before you were an employee," she said, "and I haven't stopped thinking about you since that day." He didn't speak. Couldn't. There were too many thoughts crowding his head at once. Leela, rent, the shifting ground beneath him. The way Harper was looking at him like he mattered more than a fleet report or quarterly earnings. "I'm not asking for anything right now," she said quietly. "But I needed you to know." He exhaled slowly. "You caught me off guard. I figured I would. I care about my job. I care about you keeping it." He studied her, searching for some trace of hesitation. There wasn't any. "I've been on my own a long time," he said finally. "Had to be careful. Had to keep things simple. I don't want to make your life harder. You already have," he said, then added, "but not in a bad way." She sat back down and folded her hands. "Then let me do something for you. Something real." "I don't need your money." "I'm not offering money." He raised an eyebrow. "Then what are you offering?" She held his gaze. "A seat at the table, not just in the garage. I want your input on the expansion proposal. It affects the entire operations department, and you're the only one who's actually run a logistics floor." He blinked. "That's not part of my job description." "I'm rewriting it." He crossed his arms. "Why me?" Because you see problems before they break. And because you don't pretend to know everything. He stared at her, the weight of everything unspoken pressing between them. You're serious. Dead serious. A knock interrupted them. Come in, Harper said. One of the senior executives poked his head in. Boardroom's ready. We're waiting on you. I'll be down in 5, she said, then looked back at Graham. Think about it. He nodded once, then turned to leave. Graham, he paused at the door. My shoes are uncomfortable, she said, her voice lighter. Leela was right. He didn't turn around, but the grin that crossed his face was real. As he stepped into the elevator, he caught his reflection in the mirrored paneling. He didn't look like the man who'd stood in the rain 2 months ago. He looked like someone who might actually belong in a place like this. Maybe not forever, but for now. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the only one changing. The first time Harper invited Graham to a formal company function, he almost said no. He stood outside the entrance of the Venetian ballroom, tugging at the sleeves of his tailored black jacket. The suit had arrived at his apartment 2 days earlier, packaged in a garment bag with a handwritten note from Harper that only said, "You deserve to look like the man you are." He'd stared at the note a long time before carefully hanging the suit in his closet. Now, with Leela spending the night with their upstairs neighbor who had 3 kids and a freezer full of dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets, he couldn't compete with Graham, felt like an imposter among the glittering crowd filing into the ballroom. The valet took his invitation without question. Apparently, Harper had already added his name to the VIP list. Inside, chandeliers glimmered from the high ceilings, spilling golden light over hundreds of guests in tuxedos and silk gowns. A string quartet played near the marble staircase, and waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres he couldn't pronounce. Harper stood near the center of the crowd, wearing a midnight blue gown that caught the light like water. She wasn't smiling, not exactly, but her expression softened the moment she saw him. "You came," she said, stepping closer. "I almost didn't. I would have found you." He looked at her dress, then at his shoes, polished black leather that had made him nervous to walk in. "You look like you own the night." "I do," she said, then added, "but I'd trade all of it if you told me you hated it here." "I don't hate it," he said. "I just don't know what I'm supposed to be." "You're my guest," she said. "That's enough." She slipped her hand through his arm and guided him toward the main floor, where the company's biggest investors were already gathering near the stage. Graham recognized a few faces from internal memos and finance updates, but most of them looked like they lived in a world far removed from oil changes and after-school pickups. "You know they're all watching us," he muttered. "They watch everything I do." "It's exhausting. Still," he said, keeping his voice low, "I don't exactly blend in." "You're not supposed to," she said simply. When her hand tightened around his arm, he understood. She wasn't just bringing him into her world. She was making a statement. The speeches began shortly after. Harper was the last to take the stage. Graham watched her from their table near the front, her voice calm, commanding, the kind of presence that made people stop checking their watches and actually listen. "Leadership," she said, "isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about knowing when to listen, when to trust, when to lift someone else up because you see what they can't yet see in themselves." She didn't look at him, but she didn't need to. After the applause, she returned to the table and lifted her champagne glass. "I hate public speaking," she said under her breath. "You're good at it. I'm not sure that matters anymore." He looked at her, really looked. "What does matter?" She hesitated, then turned her glass in her hand. "Lately, it's been simpler things. Honesty, kindness. A paper napkin when you're falling apart." "Harper," she didn't let him finish. "I know this isn't easy for either of us, but I'm not going to pretend I don't feel something when I'm with you." He leaned closer. "What are you expecting from me? Nothing you don't want to give." He studied her carefully, the low light catching the curve of her jaw, the quiet steel in her eyes. "I'm not used to this, to any of it. I know. I still feel like I'm waiting for the catch." "There isn't one," she said. "I don't want anything from you except you, as you are." They didn't speak for a while after that. The music swelled and couples began drifting onto the dance floor. "Dance with me," Harper said, standing. "I don't know how, let me lead." That made him laugh, a real one, surprised and low. He stood, letting her guide him to the floor. Her hand fit against his, her other resting lightly at his shoulder. "You're shaking," she said. "I'm trying not to step on your feet. You're doing fine." The music slowed, the lights dimmed, and for the first time since he'd walked into the building, Graham didn't feel like an outsider. He felt seen, held, chosen. When the song ended, he didn't let go right away. "I don't want to be a complication in your life," he said quietly. "You're not," she whispered back. "You're the only thing that makes it feel real." Before he could answer, a sharp voice cut through the crowd. Harper Nolan. They turned. A man in a tailored gray suit approached, older with graying temples and a sharp jaw. He held a glass of bourbon and looked at Graham like he was a stain on the tablecloth. "I see you found a new project," the man said to Harper. "Or is this one personal?" Harper's expression went cold. "This is Graham Foster. He runs our operations fleet. Didn't realize you were hiring from the shelter now." Graham's jaw tightened. "You've got a real gift for charm." The man ignored him. "Your father would have been appalled." Harper stepped between them. "My father didn't believe people could change. That's why he died alone." The man's face twitched, but he said nothing more. He turned and melted back into the crowd. Graham stared after him. Who was that? Someone who still thinks legacy is more important than integrity. He nodded slowly. "You didn't have to defend me." "Yes," she said, looking up at him. "I did." The rest of the night passed in a blur. Graham kept close to Harper's side, and when they finally stepped out into the cool night air, he exhaled like he hadn't breathed properly in hours. She called for her car, but before it arrived, she turned to him. "You still worried about the catch?" He looked at her, no hesitation this time. "Not anymore." She reached up, brushing her fingers across his jaw. "Then let me take you home." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The car pulled up, the door opened, and this time he didn't hesitate to step in. Leela's laughter echoed through the greenhouse atrium, her small hands reaching for the butterflies fluttering among the soft lavender and jasmine. Harper crouched beside her, gently helping her cup her palms so one could land. Graham stood a few feet away, watching them. It was Saturday morning, and Harper had surprised them both by inviting them to the botanical estate her company had recently funded for public development. Leela had insisted Harper see the butterflies, and Graham hadn't had the heart to say no. Not when his daughter lit up just hearing Harper's name. Leela turned and sprinted toward him, her arms flailing with excitement. "Daddy," she let one sit on her ring. Graham crouched to meet her. Did it stay long? Only for a second, but it was magic. He brushed a curl from her face. "Sounds like it." Harper approached them slowly, sunlight filtering through the glass ceiling and catching in her hair. She wore jeans and a soft white blouse, no heels, no sharp lines, no ironclad poise. "Just Harper, present, real. Thank you for coming," she said quietly, glancing toward Leela, who was now crouched by a small pond, fascinated by koi fish. "She's been asking to see you all week," Graham said. "I figured one more Saturday wouldn't hurt." Harper shifted her weight. "Actually, I was hoping for more than one." Graham raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking," she said, folding her arms but not in defense. It was a bracing gesture, like steadying herself before jumping. "About what this is, about you, about Leela." A koi splashed in the pond. Leela squealed. Graham waited. "I told myself I didn't want a family," she continued, "that it didn't fit into the life I built, but I was wrong. I just didn't know what it could look like, not until you." He looked down, then back at her. "You're saying you want that now?" "I'm saying I already do." Her voice was steady, "but I understand if that scares you." "It doesn't scare me," he said. "It terrifies me." She laughed softly, stepping closer. "I don't expect this to be simple. I know I come with chaos and headlines. And board meetings that go on too long." He met her eyes. "And I come with bedtime stories, sticky juice boxes, and a daughter who thinks you hung the moon." Harper glanced over at Leela, who was now humming to the fish like they were old friends. "She's extraordinary. She's everything, I know." There was a long pause. "I want to be there, Graham, in your real life, not just in the clean-cut parts." He studied her. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure about you." A few feet away, Leela stood and called out, "Can we get pancakes after this?" Graham smiled. "You heard the boss," Harper grinned. "Then let's get pancakes." They left the atrium with Leela swinging between them, her small hands gripping theirs like she'd held them both in place her whole life. Later that afternoon, After pancakes topped with strawberries and whipped cream, they drove to Graham's apartment. Harper had never been inside. She'd always met them downstairs or in public places. But today, she didn't hesitate when he opened the door. It was small, lived in, with sun-faded curtains and crayon drawings taped to the fridge. Leela ran inside ahead of them, kicking off her shoes and heading straight for her play corner. Graham gave Harper a moment to take it in. "I know it's not much," he said. She turned to him. "It's home." There was a knock at the door a few minutes later. Graham opened it to find their neighbor, Marcy, holding a casserole dish. "Brought dinner," she said cheerfully, then spotted Harper over his shoulder. "Oh, you must be the lady from the butterfly place." Harper stepped forward. "I'm Harper." Marcy handed her the dish. "Well, Harper, welcome to the building. We may not have your fancy elevators and skyline views, but we've got the best banana bread this side of the Hudson." Harper smiled. "That's a good trade." After Marcy left, Harper set the dish on the counter and turned to Graham. "You have a community here." "I do. You'd be giving that up if you moved." He tilted his head. "Who said anything about moving?" "I just meant if we ever made this more permanent." He stepped closer. "I don't need a penthouse. I don't need a fancy address. I just need to know that I'm not some temporary chapter in your life." Her eyes searched his. "You're not. Then why are you holding back?" "I'm not. I'm just trying not to bulldoze you with my world. Maybe it's time we built a new one together." She reached out, brushing her fingers along his jaw. "I've never had anyone say that to me. Get used to it." That night, after Leela had gone to bed with her giraffe tucked under one arm and a new storybook Harper had brought under the other, Graham and Harper sat on the couch, the quiet of the apartment wrapping around them. "You know," Harper said, resting her head on his shoulder, "that day you gave me that napkin. I didn't think anyone saw me, not really. I did. I never forgot it. I never will." She turned her face toward him, her lips brushing his. "I love you." He pulled her closer, the words catching in his throat before finally breaking free. "I love you too." Months later, they stood at the edge of a rooftop garden overlooking the city. It wasn't her penthouse. It wasn't his apartment. It was a new space, entirely one they'd chosen together. With room for Leela to grow, and space for Harper's wildflowers, and a kitchen where Graham could teach Leela to make pancakes on Sundays. Friends and family gathered behind them, laughter spilling into the night as fairy lights twinkled above. A simple arch of fresh blooms framed them. Leela stood proudly between them, holding both their hands. The officiant smiled. "Do you, Harper Nolan, take Graham Foster to build a life with not of power or prestige, but of love and partnership?" "I do," Harper said, eyes shining. "And do you, Graham Foster, take Harper Nolan to love not for what she built, but for who she is?" "I do." Leela beamed, then whispered, "You can kiss now." They did, and the city for once felt quiet, peaceful, whole, because they were. A year later, the house on the edge of Waverly Park was filled with the scent of vanilla, and the low hum of laughter drifting through the open windows. Graham stood at the stove, flipping the last of the golden brown waffles onto a plate, while Leela danced around the kitchen barefoot with a small, glittering crown on her head. It was her 6th birthday, and the living room was already overflowing with balloons, gift bags, and an elaborate castle-shaped cake Harper had custom-ordered from a bakery that specialized in over-the-top creations for Manhattan's elite. "Did you put the berries on top, Daddy?" Leela chirped, hopping up onto a stool and peering eagerly at the plate. "Of course," he said, holding it out to her with a flourish. Crowned with strawberries, just like her Royal Highness requested, she giggled and clapped her hands. "You remembered." "Your dad never forgets royal orders," Harper said, entering the kitchen carrying a stack of hand-painted party signs Leela had made herself. She was barefoot too, wearing soft linen pants and a faded tank top, her hair twisted up in a loose knot that Leela had decorated with sparkly butterfly clips. Leela leaned her head sideways. "Do I look like a real princess today?" "You look like a queen," Harper said, kissing the top of her head. Graham reached for Harper's hand, brushing her wrist with his thumb. "You're sure everything's handled for the party?" "Yes," she said, smiling. "I triple-checked the magician's arrival time, the pony rides are confirmed, and the fairy face painter set her alarm for 6 a.m. So she could make it across town with her wings intact, he chuckled. Only the best for our girl. They had moved into the Waverly Park house 6 months after their wedding. It was a 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and enough yard space for Leela to build tree forts and host fairy tea parties. Graham had spent weeks converting the garage into a home workshop, the kind he used to dream about when he was patching together engines in the freezing cold. Harper had filled the upstairs office with light and glass and color, and despite her initial protests, had started writing again personal essays, mostly, about grief, love, and the unexpected joy of rebuilding a life from broken pieces. The doorbell rang just as Graham was pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Stay here," he said to Leela. "Don't eat Harper's waffle." "I won't," she said sweetly, already reaching for the syrup bottle. Harper raised her brows. "She's going to drown it." "I know," he said with a grin. At the front door, Graham opened it to find Marcy from the old apartment building, holding a gift bag with tissue paper bursting from the top. "Don't worry," she said, brushing a hand over her curls. "It's not banana bread." He laughed and pulled her into a hug. "You came." "I wouldn't miss it," she said, stepping inside and handing him the bag. "6 is a big deal, and I want to see what kind of circus you two have thrown together. Pony rides, a magician, and a glitter explosion waiting to happen," she whistled. "Leela's living the dream." "She is," he said, watching her skip past them wearing a tutu over her pajama pants. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of magic tricks, frosting-covered cheeks, and one minor balloon animal disaster that ended with Harper in tears of laughter, and a unicorn-shaped pool float somehow stuck in a tree. When the last guest left and the party favors had been handed out, Graham carried a sleepy Leela upstairs and tucked her into bed. She blinked up at him through heavy lashes. "This was the best day ever," he kissed her forehead. "You say that every year, but this time I mean it more," he chuckled softly. "Good night, baby." Downstairs, Harper was curled up on the porch swing, wrapped in a throw blanket, a mug of tea cradled in her hands. The sun had set, casting deep gold across the sky, and the air carried the earthy scent of damp grass and melted frosting. He sank onto the swing beside her, resting his hand on her thigh. "You looked like you were in your element today," he said. "I was," she said. "I used to think I'd suffocate in a life like this, that I'd feel trapped. And now," she leaned her head on his shoulder, "now I feel like I can finally breathe." They sat in silence for a while, the soft creak of the swing beneath them, the quiet hum of cicadas in the trees. The world felt slower here, less clawing. For the first time in either of their lives, there was no waiting for something to fall apart, no looming deadline or unspoken wound, just rhythm, just peace. "I submitted a piece to the Times," she said after a moment. "About you." He turned slightly. "Me? Well," she said, smiling into her tea. "About us. About that day on the bench. I didn't name you, but I wanted people to know what it meant to be seen, to be chosen even when everything's messy and raw and human." He touched her wrist, letting his thumb rest over her pulse. "You didn't have to write about that." "I wanted to," she said. "You changed my life, Graham, not with a grand gesture, not in some sweeping fairytale way, just by showing up, by seeing me when I couldn't see myself." "You did the same for me," he said softly. "You gave me a world I didn't know I could belong to." She reached into her blanket and pulled out a small box. "Then it's only fair I give you something else." He opened it carefully. Inside was a key, sleek silver engraved with a single word, "Ours." "I had the workshop door redone," she said, "with better insulation, and I figured it was time it had your name on the lease." He stared at the key, then at her. "This is more than a door." "I know." He closed the box and pulled her into his arms, the blanket falling from her shoulders as she pressed against him. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you more," he said. "No," she replied, looking up with a familiar glint. "I loved you first." He kissed her then, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that didn't need fireworks or orchestrated declarations. It just was, and it was enough. That night, as the house settled into quiet and the stars blinked softly above the trees, Leela stirred in her bed, reaching for her giraffe. Downstairs, Graham and Harper stood in the doorway of the workshop, hand in hand, the future wide open in front of them. And for the first time, they weren't stepping into it alone.